Prologue is a founding employee of the company. I was being laid off in a termination meeting run by some rookie fresh out of college. She slid a folder with a standard severance package across the table, then looked at me, her expression dripping with condescension. "So," she said, "do you have any questions?" I had a laugh. Right there in front of her, I pulled out my phone and called the chairman of the board. "Rich," I said when he picked up, "you have 3 minutes. Get your ass to conference room 3 and explain this to me." On the other end of the line, the chairman's voice was shaking. Chapter 1, Jacob. In accordance with the company's new talent optimization strategy, I regret to inform you that your position is being eliminated. In the sterile quiet of the conference room, the young woman sitting across from me pushed a manila folder in my direction. Her name was Madison Hayes. She'd been a full-time HR coordinator for exactly 1 month. Today, she wore a full face of meticulously applied makeup and a sharply tailored blazer, her chin tilted up like a proud peacock. Me? I just come from the server room. My hair was a mess, and my favorite flannel shirt still had a faint stain from last night's takeout. I looked at her, and the urge to laugh was overwhelming. Novatech. I had spent 8 years building this company, nurturing it from a 3-man operation in a cramped garage apartment to the multi-billion-dollar industry upstart it was today. I was the company's first programmer. I was the bedrock of the entire engineering department. I was a living fossil who knew every line of code in our repository because I had written most of it myself. And now, this rookie, who was probably still paying off her student loans, was telling me I'd been optimized. I didn't even glance at the folder. I just leaned back in my chair and held her gaze. The reason? Madison seemed pleased by my apparent shock, by how quiet I'd become. A formulaic, professional smile touched her lips, but her eyes held a flicker of undisguised contempt. "Jacob, you've been with the company for 8 years. You're a veteran, and we respect your contributions. However, your tech stack is outdated. Your thinking has become rigid, and it no longer aligns with the company's needs for rapid future growth. Besides," she added, her voice turning colder, "your salary is far too high. It's a significant drain on our payroll budget. For what we pay you, we could hire 3 recent graduates who are younger and have more drive." Her words were like a series of ice-cold needles, extinguishing the last spark of warmth I had for this place. It's not that I hadn't thought about stepping back. I'd even talked to the chairman, Rich Sterling, about it. I told him once the new kids I was training could handle the pressure, I'd be happy to move into a technical advisor role. Rich had clapped me on the shoulder then, his voice booming. "Jake, don't be crazy. This place would fall apart without you." Now it seemed the sky wasn't falling, but the guy holding it up was being kicked out the door. I finally picked up the folder. Inside, the words "termination of employment" were printed in stark black and white. The severance package was a standard N+1 offer. 8 years of my life, of my loyalty, of my sweat and blood, bought off with a check that amounted to a rounding error in the company's finances. A fire ignited in my gut, hot and furious. But I didn't let it show. I simply took the papers and gently slid the folder back across the table. Whose decision was this? My voice was unervingly calm. It was mine. Madison's chin lifted even higher. "This is the first round of organizational restructuring I'm leading. Mr. Sterling has given me full authority to handle it." "Mr. Sterling?" I savored the name, a cold amusement creeping into my eyes. "Which Mr. Sterling?" Madison's brow furrowed in annoyance, as if my question was profoundly stupid. "How many Mr. Sterlings do we have here?" "The chairman, of course. Richard Sterling." "Ah." I nodded, feigning comprehension. "Right." Then, right in front of her, I pulled out my iPhone. Madison watched me, a cynical smirk on her face. "What are you doing, Jacob? Unhappy with the package? Trying to call someone to plead your case? I'd advise you not to waste your time. This decision is final. The sooner you sign, the better it will be for everyone." I ignored her. I scrolled through my contacts to a name saved simply as Richie and hit dial. He picked up on the first ring. "Jake, thank God. Did you finally figure out that server issue?" "Hey, listen, that distributed storage solution you pitched last week? I mentioned it to a few of our investors, and their eyes lit up like Christmas trees. Rich's familiar, booming voice filled the silence. I cut him off. "Rich," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the dead silent conference room, It was terrifyingly clear. You have 3 minutes. Get your ass to conference room 3 and explain this to me. Then I hung up. The silence that followed was absolute. The look of smug superiority on Madison's face had frozen, then shattered. She stared at me as if I were a lunatic, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and ridicule. Jacob, who? Who did you just call? She stammered. Mr. Sterling, I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. I watched her with a detached calm. You said he gave you his authority, right? You. Madison's face flushed red, then went pale. She shot to her feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. You addressed the chairman by his first name, and you told him to get his ass over here? Jacob, are you insane? You're digging your own grave. She clearly thought I was bluffing, putting on a pathetic show of defiance. I just smiled and said nothing. I lifted my wrist and glanced at my watch. 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. Chapter 2. Madison's expression was a toxic mix of rage and pity. In all her brief professional experience, she had likely never encountered a laid-off employee with this much audacity. To her, I was a cornered animal, hissing and spitting in a final, useless act of defiance. Fine, Jacob. Fine, she seethed, her chest heaving. I'll sit right here and watch how you talk your way out of this one. She dropped back in her chair, crossing her arms, her posture radiating contempt. She was certain I was bluffing. She was certain the chairman of the board would never take a call from me, let alone follow my orders. The seconds ticked by. The conference room was soundproofed, and the silence was broken only by the sound of my own steady breathing and Madison's increasingly ragged breaths. She pretended to be unfazed, but her eyes kept darting toward the door. 1 minute, I said conversationally. Madison's lips tightened into a thin line. The mockery in her eyes intensified. In her mind, my calm was a facade. The moment 3 minutes were up, my humiliation would be complete. Suddenly, a series of frantic, heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway. The sound grew closer, a panicked rhythm that ended abruptly just outside the conference room door. Madison instinctively sat up straighter. Bam! The door flew open with such force that it hit the wall with a loud crack. And there stood Richard Sterling, our multimillionaire chairman, a man who cultivated an image of stoic, unflappable authority, was now standing there, drenched in sweat. His tie was askew, and a button on his expensive suit jacket had popped off. His chest was rising and falling violently. He had clearly run all the way here. His eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on me, sitting calmly in my chair, and then on the stunned Madison, his fleshy face seemed to tremble. Jake, Rich's voice was shaky. He stumbled forward, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. What were you doing in here? Is something wrong? Who pissed you off? As he spoke, he was anxiously studying my expression, trying to read the situation. Behind him, Madison was completely frozen. Her mouth hung open. Her eyes were as wide as dinner plates. She was staring at the scene, her brain refusing to process what she was seeing. The man who, in her world, was a corporate deity, a man her own director treated with fawning reverence, was now standing like a repentant schoolboy in front of the obsolete old relic she was in the middle of firing. He was practically bowing, his face a mask of desperation. This was impossible. I didn't answer Rich right away. Instead, I lifted my gaze to Madison. I pointed a finger at the termination folder on the table, then at her. She works for you? Rich's eyes followed my finger. When he saw the stark white paper of the termination of employment, notice, his entire body convulsed as if he'd been tasered. His eyes instantly turned bloodshot. The sweat on his brow started pouring down his face. What is? He whipped his head around, his gaze locking on a Madison with a terrifying intensity. The look in his eyes was murderous. Did you do this? Rich's voice was a guttural roar, like that of a wounded animal. The shout jolted Madison from her stupor. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her face was ashen, her lips trembled, but no words came out. I asked you a question. Did you do this? Rich snatched the folder from the table and slammed it down in front of her with a deafening crash. Mr. Sterling, I was acting in the company's best interests. Madison's voice was choked with tears. His skills are obsolete, and his salary is too high. You don't know a damn thing, he screamed, his voice raw with fury. Do you have any idea who this is? Do you know who wrote the first line of code for Novatech? Do you have any idea that without him, this entire company would be a pile of worthless garbage? Firing him, you might as well be burning the company to the ground. Rich was shaking with uncontrollable rage, jabbing a finger at Madison, all pretense of his usual composed demeanor gone. Madison, stunned by the verbal assault, covered her face with her hands as tears began to stream down her cheeks. She was hurt, confused, and utterly terrified. She couldn't understand why firing one programmer would cause the chairman to lose his mind. I watched it all unfold with a cold detachment. I watched Rich's explosive anger and Madison's terrified tears. I felt no satisfaction, just a vast, cold emptiness. I stood up and straightened my wrinkled flannel shirt. Rich, are you done with the theatrics? My voice was quiet, but it cut through Rich's tirade like a knife. He spun around to face me, the fury on his face instantly replaced by sheer panic. Jake, listen to me, I can explain. I swear, I had no idea about this. I've been buried in the IPO roadshow prep. All the HR changes are being handled by the department heads. So that's your explanation? I looked at him, my eyes like chips of ice. You're going to blame it all on a rookie? A fresh wave of cold sweat broke out on Rich's forehead. He knew. He knew I was angry. Not just annoyed. Truly, profoundly angry. Chapter 3, Jake. Rich opened his mouth, but he knew any excuse would sound pathetic. He knew what I was capable of. 8 years ago, the three of us were crammed into a tiny apartment we rented for $800 a month, trying to build a company out of nothing. He was the salesman, the one who sold the dream and chased the investment money. Our other partner, Leo, handled the marketing, and I was the one who turned their grandiose promises into reality, one line of code at a time. Novatech's entire architecture, its core algorithms, I built it all, fueled by caffeine and a stubborn refusal to sleep. You could say I was the technical father of this company. More than that, when we were struggling to close our series of funding, when we were weeks away from going bankrupt, I was the one who invested the entire $1 million inheritance my parents had left me. That money got me 30% of the company's seed equity. But to make it easier for Rich to manage the company and raise funds, I was never listed as a shareholder on paper. We signed a trust agreement. I hated networking. I hated management meetings. I just wanted to build things. So, for all these years, I was content to be just a programmer, earning a high salary that was a pittance compared to what I was actually worth. Here, only Rich and our other co-founder, Leo Vance, knew who I really was. Everyone else just thought I was a senior engineer who got lucky and joined the company early. But Rich had forgotten something crucial. I wasn't an employee. I was a partner. I was the silent owner with veto power, second only to his own. That's enough, I said, holding up a hand to cut him off. I walked over to Madison. She was still covering her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Her eyes, when she dared to look up, were filled with a terrifying confusion. I looked down at her. Your name is Madison, right? She flinched and nodded jerkily, unable to meet my eyes. You said my tech stack is obsolete, that my thinking is rigid. With every word I spoke, she trembled more violently. You said my salary is too high, that for one of me, you could hire 3 college grads. Madison's face was now the color of bleached paper. So, here's your chance. I held up 3 fingers. I'll give you 3 times, no, 10 times your salary. You go and maintain the company's server infrastructure. You go and fix the critical bug in the Project Chimera build. You go and optimize the AI model that's due for delivery next month. I leaned in closer, staring directly into her eyes. Can you do that? I asked, enunciating every syllable. Madison's lips quivered for a long moment, but she couldn't form a single word. All her HR theories, her KPI metrics, her buzzwords about cost-cutting and efficiency, they were all a pathetic joke in the face of a technical reality she couldn't possibly comprehend. She was finally starting to understand that she hadn't just tried to fire an old employee. She tried to speak, but her throat was tight with fear. No, I let out a cold, humorless laugh. Then what good are you to me? With that, I turned away from her and faced Rich. Get her out of here. Now. My tone wasn't a request. It was an order. Rich didn't hesitate for a second. He pointed a trembling finger at the door and roared at the still-dazed Madison. You're fired. Go to HR, pack your things, and get the hell out of my building. Madison looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. One moment, she was firing someone. The next, she was being fired herself. The whiplash of the reversal was too much for her to process. Mr. Sterling, but I'm Kyle's girlfriend, she blurted out in a panic, playing her final card. Kyle. Kyle Sterling. Rich's nephew. A junior manager in the marketing department. He'd been leveraging his family connection for years, acting like a petty tyrant in his own little fiefdom. It was obvious now how Madison had gotten her position and the arrogance to go with it. As expected, Rich's expression faltered at the mention of Kyle's name. He glanced at me, a look of pained hesitation in his eyes. I almost smiled. Kyle Sterling? Perfect. I took out my phone again. Right there in front of them, I opened the company's internal Slack. I found the main engineering channel and started typing a new post. The title was A Few Fatal Flaws in the Core Logic of Project Chimera. The content was a ruthless, technically precise dissection of the company's most important project, a project Kyle was supposed to be managing the client relations for. I detailed 3 critical, underlying bugs that would cause the entire system to suffer a catastrophic failure within a month of launch. And I accidentally let it slip in the post that I had already reported these 3 bugs with solutions in an email to the project lead, Kyle Sterling, 6 months ago. An email that had been completely ignored. I hit send. It took less than 30 seconds. My phone began to vibrate uncontrollably. The engineering Slack channel had exploded. Holy crap, Jake just dropped a bomb. This analysis just tore Project Chimera to shreds. He's not wrong either. I knew there was something wrong with that build. The test data was always screwy, and that idiot Kyle told us we were being paranoid. He flagged this 6 months ago. Jesus, is Kyle trying to sink the entire company? It's over. If Chimera fails, we're all screwed. The IPO is dead. I turned my phone screen so Rich could see the flood of messages. The color drained from his face. Project Chimera was the key to a successful IPO this year. It was the centerpiece of every pitch he'd made to investors for the past 12 months. If that project failed, the IPO wouldn't just be delayed. The company's valuation would plummet back to zero overnight. He snatched the phone from my hand, his own hand shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He scrolled through the Slack messages, a low groan escaping his lips. That damn kid, he muttered. Then his head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a volcanic fury. He stormed out of the conference room and bellowed in the main office. Somebody get that bastard Kyle Sterling and bring him to me now. The room was quiet again. It was just me and Madison, who had collapsed back in her chair, utterly broken. She finally understood. She hadn't just tried to cut off a finger. She had tried to sever the company's main artery. Chapter 4. Kyle Sterling arrived quickly, flanked by 2 security guards who looked like they were escorting a prisoner. He was younger than Rich, but with the same soft, overfed look, his hair slick with product. Uncle Rich, you wanted to see me? Hey, take it easy, guys. You're wrinkling the suit. Kyle swaggered into the room, complaining loudly until he saw his uncle's face, which was as dark as a thundercloud. His voice trailed off. UNC. Uncle Rich? What's going on? He saw me standing off to the side, and a look of contempt flickered in his eyes. Then he saw Madison, slumped in her chair, her face streaked with tears. He frowned. Maddie, what are you doing crying in here? Did this old fossil give you a hard time? He pointed at me, his tone dripping with disdain. Madison frantically tried to signal him with her eyes, but he was completely oblivious. Don't worry, Uncle Rich, I'll handle this. This relic is on his way out anyway. I'll just have security throw him out right now. Kyle reached for his phone. Wham! This time, it wasn't a folder hitting a table. It was Rich's fist. He grabbed his nephew by the collar of his $1,000 shirt and slammed him against the wall. Kyle was completely stunned. He slid to the floor, clutching his chest, looking at his uncle in disbelief. Uncle, you hit me. I'll kill you, you useless, backstabbing little parasite. Rich was shaking with rage, shoving my phone in Kyle's face. Look at this. Look what you've done. Kyle scrambled to look at the screen. As he read the Slack post and the panicked messages from the engineering team, his face went completely white. No, that's impossible, he stammered. Those bugs. I hired a contractor to fix those. A contractor? I spoke for the first time, my voice cold. You mean that shell company, Fox Tech Solutions? The founder is one of my old protégés. You paid them 20 grand to clean up your mess. They turned around and offered me 50 grand to actually fix the problem for them. I paused, letting it sink in. Guess what I told them? Kyle's pupils shrank to pinpricks. He stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost. You knew all along? You were just watching me fail. I gave you a chance, I said, my expression unreadable. 6 months ago, I sent you the solution. You treated my email like spam. Kyle's body went limp, and he slumped to the floor, defeated. He was finished. He knew it. Project Chimera was his ticket to a promotion, to a real seat at the table. Now, that project was a time bomb he had personally set, and I was holding the detonator. Uncle Rich, I am sorry. Uncle, you have to help me. Kyle started sobbing, grabbing onto Rich's leg. I'll never do it again. It was Madison, this conniving bitch. She put me up to it. She said this J guy was old and useless, just dead weight, so you bastard. Madison, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, lunged forward and slapped Kyle across the face. It was you, Kyle. You were the one who was jealous of Jake. You said you couldn't stand that an old man was making more money than you and had more respect. You told me to fire him. The two of them descended into a pathetic, screaming match right in front of us, clawing at each other like rabid animals. All the ugliness, the greed, the petty jealousy, it was all on display. I watched the disgusting spectacle, a bitter irony settling in my stomach. This was the future of the company Rich was building? This was the fresh blood he was so eager to bring in? Enough! My voice was a low growl, but it cut through their hysterics. Kyle and Madison froze, looking at me with a newfound terror, as if I were some kind of wrathful god. I walked up to Rich. Rich, is this your company? Or is it a family daycare? Rich flinched. His lips trembled, but he couldn't speak. I trusted you with the technology. I trusted you with our team. I trusted you with my life's work. My voice was quiet, but each word was a hammer blow to Rich's conscience. 8 years, Rich. What have you been doing? You let nepotism fester, letting this parasite hollow out the company from the inside. Your management is in shambles. You created a place where a rookie can fire a founding engineer. You've forgotten why we started this. All you see now is money, the IPO, your goddamn stock charts. With every accusation, Rich's head sank lower. Finally, his massive frame seemed to collapse in on itself. Jake, I am sorry. I'm so sorry. This titan of industry, this commanding CEO, was now on the verge of tears. It's too late for sorry. My gaze was unforgiving. I'm giving you 2 options. 1, I call my lawyer right now, and we liquidate my shares. You know exactly what Novatech's equity structure looks like. You know what happens if my 30% stake gets pulled right before the IPO. Rich's face went chalk white. He knew it would be a death sentence. The news that the second largest shareholder was cashing out would cause their valuation to implode. Every ounce of their work would be for nothing. 2, I paused, watching the fear twist his features. You call an emergency meeting of the board. Get every single shareholder on the line. I'm going to take back what's mine, and I'm going to do it in front of everyone. Rich's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. He knew what I meant. I was done being the man behind the curtain. I'll take the second option. Rich's voice was a raw, strangled whisper. Good. I nodded once. Then I turned and walked out of the conference room, a room that now reeked of failure and betrayal. I didn't spare another glance for the pathetic couple on the floor. As far as I was concerned, they were already gone. Chapter 5, when I got back to my desk, the entire engineering department was silent. Dozens of programmers were standing, arranged in neat rows like soldiers waiting for inspection. Every single eye was on me. Their faces were a mixture of worry, anger, and confusion. My second in command, Alex Chun, was at the front. I'd mentored him since he was a fresh-faced graduate. Jake. Alex stepped forward, his eyes red. We all saw it, the post on Slack, and the all-hands email from HR. The news of my termination had apparently already been blasted out to the entire company. This is bullshit, Jake. We should all just quit. Yeah, if Jake goes, we go. Let's see how they run this place then. Without Jake, no one can fix Project Chimera. Good luck explaining that to the clients. The anger in the room was palpable. These are my guys. These quiet, heads-down coders were now ready to go to war for me. A warmth spread through my chest. 8 years hadn't been for nothing. I had this. I had a team of people who had my back. I raised my hand, and the room instantly fell silent. Everybody sit down. Get back to work. My voice was calm, but carried an authority they all recognized. But Jake, Alex protested. No buts, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. The sky isn't falling. I walked to my desk. The chair, molded to my body after 8 years, felt like home. My cold coffee was still sitting there, next to a picture of my daughter, her smile bright enough to power a city. I opened my laptop and logged into a system I hadn't touched in 8 years, the shareholder-exclusive administrative portal. I typed in a long, complex password. The page loaded. A clean, simple pie chart appeared on the screen. Richard Sterling, 45%. Jacob Evans, 30%. Leo Vance, 15%. Other early investors, 10%. I stared at that orange wedge representing my 30%. This was who I really was at Novatech. I ignored the concerned glances from my team and the dozens of frantic Slack messages from Leo, who was away on business. I just calmly drafted an email to Novatech, Board of Directors, and all shareholders. Subject: Motion to convene an emergency shareholder meeting to deliberate the removal of Chairman Richard Sterling and restructure company management. The body of the email was short and to the point. Due to gross managerial negligence and rampant nepotism, Chairman Richard Sterling has exposed the company's core projects to catastrophic risk, precipitated the loss of key technical personnel, and severely damaged shareholder interests. I hereby move for his immediate removal as chairman of the board. Due to a chaotic and irresponsible management structure, I move for the immediate termination of all unqualified personnel, including Kyle Sterling and Madison Hayes, who have proven detrimental to the company's health. To stabilize the company's technical teams and ensure the successful delivery of our core projects, I, Jacob Evans, will formally transition from a technical role to an executive management position. I hereby nominate myself as a candidate for the position of chairman. I finished typing, took a deep breath, and clicked send. I leaned back in my chair, a long, slow exhale leaving my body. My dream was simple. I wanted to be a quiet, wealthy engineer. I wanted to write elegant code, watch the company go public, and then use the profits to travel the world with my wife and daughter. They had shattered that dream. Fine. If they wouldn't let me build from the engine room, I would just have to take the helm myself. Ping. A new message on my phone. It was from Rich. 3 words. I got it. A moment later, my phone rang. It was Leo. Jake, are you serious? Leo's voice was filled with shock. Do I sound like I'm joking? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm with you, Leo said, his voice now firm. This place is not what we set out to build anymore. Rich has been getting complacent for years. It's about time someone set him straight. A small smile touched my lips. Thanks, Leo. After hanging up, I stood and faced the engineering department. Every single one of my guys was watching me, waiting. I cleared my throat. All right, everyone, drop what you're doing. You've all earned a paid afternoon off. They stared back, confused. Jake, what's happening? Starting tomorrow, I said, my gaze sweeping across each of them. This department answers to me. And everyone's salary is getting a 30% raise, effective immediately. For a second, there was dead silence. Then, the room erupted in a deafening roar of cheers. Jake, you're a legend. Holy hell, 30%. I knew it. I knew Jake wouldn't leave us hanging. I watched their ecstatic faces and allowed myself a real smile. Meanwhile, on the other side of the building, in the executive suite, Richard Sterling sat in his office, staring at the email on his phone, his face the color of ash. He knew his era was over, and mine was just beginning. Chapter 6, the emergency shareholders meeting, was scheduled for the following afternoon in the main boardroom. I didn't go to the office that day. Instead, I took the day off. My wife, my daughter, and I went to an amusement park. Watching my daughter's face, alight with pure joy as she spun around on the carousel, I felt the rage that had been simmering inside me for days finally begin to cool. This wasn't about power or revenge. It was about protecting what I had built. It was about taking care of the team that depended on me. It was about preserving the legacy that would one day let my daughter proudly tell her friends, my dad built that company. At 2 o'clock, I put on a proper suit for the first time since my wedding day. My wife straightened my tie, carefully smoothing out the wrinkles on the lapels. "Go get him," she said, her eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering support. "Go take back what's yours." I nodded and kissed her. "I'll be home for dinner." As I drove up to the office building, I saw a crowd of employees gathered near the entrance. Word had clearly gotten out. They were all here to witness the coup. I spotted my team from the engineering department front and center, standing together like an honor guard. When they saw my car, Alex and a few others immediately moved to open my door and clear a path through the throng of people. Jake's here." I got out of the car and gave them a nod. The crowd parted silently. I walked toward the main entrance, step by deliberate step. Every eye in the place was on me, their expressions a mix of curiosity, shock, and a new, dawning sense of awe. The receptionists who used to ignore me, the employees from other departments who saw me as nothing more than an aging geek. They were all looking at me, as if for the first time. I kept my eyes forward and walked straight into the lobby. The large LCD screen on the wall was still displaying the company's motto, Novatech, illuminating the future. A faint smile touched my lips. The future was about to get a whole lot brighter. It just needed a new person flipping the switch. The boardroom was on the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, I saw that Rich, Leo, and a handful of other minority shareholders were already there. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Rich was sitting in the chairman's seat at the head of the table. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he had aged a decade overnight. When I walked in, he flinched. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I ignored him, walking directly to the second most important seat at the table, the one reserved for the company's vice chairman, the one that had been empty for 8 years. I pulled out the chair and sat down. "Looks like everyone's here," I said, my calm voice breaking the heavy silence. "Let's begin." The other investors exchanged uneasy glances. Leo cleared his throat, taking on the role of moderator. "We're gathered today at the request of Mr. Jacob Evans for an emergency shareholder meeting. You've all seen the agenda outlined in his email." He looked at me. "Jacob, the floor is yours." I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I pressed a button on the console in front of me, activating the room's projector. A document appeared on the large screen. It was a series of contracts and wire transfers, showing how Kyle Sterling had used his position to outsource company projects to a shell corporation owned by his brother-in-law, embezzling over $3 million in the process. The next slide showed internal emails and chat logs, detailing how Kyle and Madison had conspired to terminate veteran engineers to make room for their own friends and cronies. The final slide was a risk assessment report, detailing the potential financial losses from Project Chimera's imminent failure due to Kyle's incompetence and delays. The number on the screen had 9 digits. Each slide was a sledgehammer blow. Rich's face went from pale to gray to the color of death. "Rich," I said, turning to him, my voice like ice. "Did you know about any of this?" He shuddered, his lips trembling. I didn't know." "Kyle, you didn't know?" I let out a cold laugh. "Then how about this?" I put up one last document. It was an at-risk agreement Rich had personally signed with a venture capital firm. It stipulated that if Novatech failed to go public by the end of the fiscal year, he, personally, would owe the firm $500 million. Project Chimera was the Hail Mary pass he was counting on to make the IPO happen. "You bet the entire company on your personal gamble," I said, my voice rising. "To cover your ass, you let your nephew run wild. You let him hollow out our teams, pushing out the very people who built this place in favor of cheap labor he could control. Rich, have you forgotten the days we started this company, living on ramen noodles and a shared dream? Have you forgotten the hundreds of employees out there who have entrusted you with their careers, their livelihoods?" My questions hung in the air, each one an indictment. Rich finally broke. He slumped in his chair and covered his face with his hands. "I'm sorry, Jake," he sobbed, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, my brother." Now a stranger. I looked away from him, my gaze sweeping across the other shareholders. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've made my case. It's time to vote. All in favor of the motion to remove Richard Sterling as chairman, please raise your hand." I raised my hand first. A second later, Leo's hand went up without hesitation. The other investors looked at each other, then, one by one, their hands went up too. They weren't fools. They could see the difference between a sinking ship and a lifeline. In the end, only Rich's hand remained down. He looked up at me, his eyes a swirling vortex of regret, resentment, and, strangely, relief. Slowly, he raised his hand. The vote was unanimous. Done, I said with a nod. Second item on the agenda. All in favor of appointing me, Jacob Evans, as the new chairman of Novatech, please raise your hand. This time, there was no hesitation. Every hand in the room, including Rich's, went up. I looked at the show of support, but I felt no elation. This was just the beginning. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the sprawling city below. Novatech, this massive ship, had been steered dangerously off course. Today, I was taking the wheel. Notify HR, I said without turning around. Terminate Kyle, Sterling, Madison Hayes, and all associated parties. No evidence. And inform them that we reserve the right to pursue legal action. And one more thing. Send out a company-wide announcement. Tell them Jacob Evans is back. Chapter 7. The announcement hit the company's internal network like a shockwave. The corporate Slack channels instantly lit up, the traffic so heavy that it nearly crashed the servers. Holy S.T. Jake is the new chairman. I knew it. The only person who could make Rich run down the hall like that had to be the secret boss. Wait, so that rookie HR girl, she tried to fire a co-founder and the new chairman? El Mayo, that's the funniest thing I've heard all year. What happened to her and Kyle? Gone. I just saw them leaving with their little boxes of shame. They looked like drowned rats. Good riddance. I've been waiting for someone to finally get rid of that nepotism hire Kyle. Jake is the man. The engineering department is back on top. I ignored the chatter. My first official act as chairman was to summon the entire engineering team to the main boardroom. The same room where I had been fired just 2 days earlier. Alex and the others filed in, their heads held high, their faces beaming with pride. I smiled. Do you remember what I said yesterday? Yes. The room roared in unison. Effective today, every member of the engineering department receives a 30% salary increase, I announced. I held up a hand. That's the baseline. Once Project Chimera is successfully delivered, every member of that project team will receive an additional bonus equal to 6 months' salary. The cheer that erupted was so loud, I thought the windows might shatter. But, I said, my voice cutting through the noise, and the room fell silent again. Let me be clear. I'm giving you the resources. In return, I expect results. I want the mess left by the previous management cleaned up, and I want it done in 1 month. I want the new system fully operational and launched in 3 months. I looked at each of them, my gaze sharp. Is that understood? Yes, sir. The answer was a single, unified roar of pure determination. The drive and passion that had been suppressed for so long were finally unleashed. After rallying the engineers, I called a meeting with all department heads and directors. The atmosphere in the boardroom was tense. These were the people who ran the company's daily operations, and they were all sitting ramrod straight, studying me with cautious apprehension. I got straight to the point. From this day forward, Novatech will operate on 3 principles: competence, efficiency, and results. I don't care who you know or how long you've been here. If you can deliver, you will be rewarded. If you can't, you will be replaced. Every department is now under performance review. In 1 month, I will personally audit your teams. If I find anyone who is coasting, anyone who is dead weight, the director of that department will be the first one out the door. I could see the color drain from several faces around the table. I knew that under Rich's lax leadership, the company had accumulated its fair share of freeloaders. It was time to trim the fat. Meeting adjourned, I said, giving them no time for questions. My first lesson to them was that I didn't waste time. The rest of the day was a blur of paperwork, meetings, and signing off on a slew of termination and promotion orders. Late that night, I was finally alone in the expansive chairman's office. I leaned back in the plush leather chair, a chair that had belonged to Rich just that morning, and stared out at the glittering city lights. It was only then that the reality of the situation began to sink in. Knock, knock. The door creaked open. It was Rich. He was holding a cardboard box filled with personal effects. He looked even older and more beaten down than he had in the meeting. Jake, he said, hovering by the door. What is it? I asked, my voice neutral. These are some of the company's earliest files, and some old photos of the three of us when we started. I thought you should have them. He placed the box on the floor, just inside the doorway. And this, he said, pulling a debit card from his pocket. This is all the money I skimmed from the company, the kickbacks from Kyle, everything. It's about $12 million. The pin is your birthday. I know it doesn't fix anything, but it's all I can do. He looked at me, and then he bowed deeply from the waist. I am sorry, Jake. Take care of Novatech. He straightened up, turned without another word, and walked away, his lonely figure disappearing down the long, empty hallway. The 8 years of brotherhood we had shared were officially over. I didn't get up to get the box or the card. The past was the past. I picked up my desk phone and called Alex. Alex, come up to my office. He was there in minutes, slightly out of breath. Jake, Mr. Chairman. He still wasn't used to it. Just call me Jake, I said with a small smile. Right, Jake, how many people are on the Project Chimera team right now? 35 core engineers. Not enough, I said, shaking my head. I'm giving you carte blanche. I want you to start recruiting. Headhunt the best talent you can find. Offer them double the market rate. I don't care about the cost. If they're good, I want them. Alex's eyes lit up. Jake, that's going to be incredibly expensive. Money isn't the object, I said, looking him straight in the eye. I want you to build the most elite engineering team in this entire industry. From now on, when people hear the name Novatech, I want them to think of one thing: technical excellence. My vision was contagious. Alex was practically vibrating with excitement. You got it, Jake. I won't let you down. Watching him rush off, his mind already buzzing with plans, I felt a sense of rightness. This was the company I had always wanted to build, and these are the people I wanted to build it with. Chapter 8, my promotion, was an earthquake, and the aftershocks continued to ripple through the entire company. The Great Purge had begun. For 2 weeks, I led a top-to-bottom audit of every single department. Anyone who had gotten their job through connections, anyone whose performance was mediocre, anyone who was just warming a chair, they were all gone. The atmosphere was tense, people were on edge. But for the employees who were actually talented and hardworking, the ones who had been consistently overlooked because they didn't play politics, it was a new dawn. They saw that this was not just a cosmetic change. It was a cultural reset. A brilliant marketer who had been sidelined for years for crossing Kyle was promoted to director of his department. A veteran accountant who had dutifully blocked countless fraudulent expense reports was named the new head of the finance department. The message was clear. Merit was now the only currency that mattered at Novatech. Naturally, when you take away someone's meal ticket, they tend to fight back. The first to protest was Kyle's mother, Rich's sister. She stormed into my office, screaming and wailing, accusing me of being a thankless traitor who was systematically destroying her family. I didn't even look up from my monitor. I just buzzed security and had her escorted from the building. Then, I instructed our legal team to hand over all evidence of Kyle's embezzlement to the Austin Police Department. You have to make an example of the first one to challenge you. A few days later, Kyle Sterling was arrested and charged with felony corporate fraud. When that news broke, all the other well-connected parasites who had been thinking of banding together to oppose me immediately fell silent. They finally understood. I wasn't rich. I didn't do favors, and I didn't care about feelings. With the internal rot excised, I focused all my energy on Project Chimera. I practically lived at the office, working alongside my team, fueled by coffee and a relentless drive to fix what was broken. I personally rewrote the project's entire core algorithm from scratch. For those 2 weeks, I felt like I was back in that garage apartment 8 years ago. I slept on a cot in my office for 3 or 4 hours a night, waking up to dive right back into the code. My energy was infectious. Not a single person on the team complained. We were united, a single entity focused on a single goal. 1 month later, the new version of the Chimera system went live for beta testing. The performance metrics were flawless. The system was running 300% more efficiently than the original specifications had called for. The moment the successful test results came in, the entire engineering department erupted in a roar of cheers and applause. People were hugging. Some were even crying with relief and pride. I felt a familiar warmth in my chest. This was the pure, unadulterated joy of building something that works. I made good on my promise. The 6-month salary bonus hit every project member's bank account at the end of that month. The news sent another jolt through the company. Everyone now knew that if you worked hard for Jacob Evans, you would be rewarded handsomely. The company's morale and sense of shared purpose soared to an all-time high. It was around then that I received an unexpected phone call. The caller ID said Madison Hayes. Her voice was timid, laced with a desperate plea. Mr. Evans. It's me, Madison. What do you want? I asked, my voice flat. Mr. Evans, I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was arrogant and foolish, and I'm hoping you can find it in your heart to give me another chance. I saw on LinkedIn that you're still hiring. I can do anything. I'd even be happy to work as a receptionist. I could almost picture her hunched over her phone, bowing her head in supplication. A chance? I said with a cold, humorless chuckle. I'd give you a chance. You're the one who threw it in the trash. And as for our receptionist position, the minimum requirements are a master's degree and fluency in 3 languages. Do you qualify, Madison? There is a long silence on the other end, punctuated by the sound of a choked sob. Is there anything else? If not, I have work to do. Wait, she cried out. Mr. Evans, Kyle, he was arrested, and he's blaming everything on me. He's telling them I was the mastermind. I think I'm going to be charged. You get what you deserve, I said, cutting her off without a shred of pity. When you sat in that conference room, slid that folder across the table, and passed judgment on me, you sealed your own fate. You made your bed. Now lie in it. I hung up the phone. I stood and looked out the window at the night sky, but I felt no sense of victory, no pleasure in my revenge. It was all just business. A lion doesn't feel joy when it steps on an ant. My fight wasn't with people like her anymore. My gaze was fixed on the horizon. Novatech was just the beginning. I was going to build an empire. End of excerpt.